I made a TikTok earlier today about the danger of overemphasis of standardized tests. And I want to go through that a little bit, but also talk about what benefits there are for standardized tests in public schools. So first, let's get this out of the way that there's a lot of danger in using standardized tests the way that we use them right now. And I talk about it in a TikTok, but I want to go real quickly. First, the way that we have standardized test structure today, these are basically just a stand-in for the parental income of the child. And there's tons of research to show. So there's this direct relationship between whether or not you live in poverty and how you do on these standardized tests. So when we use these tests as a measure for teacher quality or school effectiveness, it's really just a repackaging of how much money the kids' parents make in the system. So parents and teachers have seen the amount of time that standardized tests have taken up in the curriculum and day of a child, and have seen that this is not the best use of a child's day. Are we really teaching important concepts, or are we rather teaching kids how to take tests? But one of the first benefits I want to talk about with testing in schools is how it focuses a principal and a teacher's job. The way I think about it is this way, is that we learned while teaching my son how to ride a bike that training wheels can be kind of dangerous as a way to teach a child to ride. Yes, they keep you upright, but then when kids have the training wheels taken off, they, instead of knowing how to bank around turns, are more likely to just turn the handlebars. And if you know how to ride a bike, if you turn those handlebars, you're gonna fall forward. Standardized tests to me are like training wheels. They will keep you upright. Think of new teachers. I taught for 5 years. It was at a private school. And so maybe this is different than how public schools operate. That first year is absolutely terrifying. You are handed this kind of end goal. Children need to be able to arrive at this point by this date, and you have tons of flexibility on how children arrive at that end gate. I since went and got my master's in education, curriculum, and instruction, and learned how to stack lessons on top of each other to get to concepts, using facts to build to the concept so kids can answer larger questions. But as a first year teacher, all I knew is that I needed to get to that end point. And how to get there is just absolutely terrifying. Regularly, I would be, I don't know, just like one lesson ahead of the kids. Maybe not. Maybe by the time the class was over, we had exhausted those lessons. So when kids would ask, is this going to be on the test? A lot of times I would answer it right then and there. Maybe. I don't know. I have yet to write the test. But having a high stakes standardized test shows you exactly what has to be taught at any given time, and can focus your lesson planning because you know that you have to hit A, B, and C, versus a world without a standardized test. You can imagine, like, okay, they just need to be ready for next year. And if you don't have a system that aligns the curriculum between grades, that offers every individual teacher a ton of flexibility, but that flexibility can be really scary, especially for first year teachers. And it's not just teachers. Think about principals and school administrators. Without standardized tests, your goal really just has to align with what you think the public's goals are for public education. And that could be anything. Does that mean skills acquisition? Does that mean being a good citizen? Being a good, I don't know, person in your family, in your community, in your democracy? What does it mean? Does it mean mental health? Does it mean physical health? Absent this kind of power over you saying they need to know A, B, and C, and you need to have scores here, here, and here, it can be really daunting, specifically for new administrators of like, okay, then how do we focus our energies? How do we focus our times? Versus if the measure of your school is completely tied into a test, it can become a lot easier to just say like, okay, my goal is to have kids do better on this test. That means that I need to have this amount of planning periods for teachers. I need to have this sort of tutoring set up because it's all going towards that goal of having a test. I think it's important here, though, to talk about how if these are like training wheels, and once you take them off, we can put our schools in a really difficult position, but it is better to live in that world. I am of the mind that the overemphasis of standardized tests is one of our greatest failures in public education. But I want to recognize that there are a lot of teachers and a lot of principals and a lot of administrators that if you took away these standardized tests would have no idea how to order a child's time inside the school. Another benefit of standardized tests that gets swept on the rug comes with the federal reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So this ESEA passed in the 1960s, and this is the federal law around public schools. And it's reauthorized every few years, and I think a lot of people recognize that in 2001, it was reauthorized under the name No Child Left Behind. And this bill has been rightfully panned nationwide. But one of the important things about it, I think, is how it relied on the disaggregation of data based on race and ability, saying that you can't just take a school's average test scores and then say, this school is great, this school is bad. You need to be able to break it down, show how are the white kids doing, how are black kids doing, how are students with disabilities doing. Once you do that, once you break it down, you empower families, communities with stronger tools to see if their child is getting an adequate public education. And I do think that viewed overall, when you're looking at an entire state or an entire district, specifically medium and larger sized districts, or the nation, once you disaggregate by data, it becomes harder to make the case that everyone is doing great or everyone is doing poorly. We can see definitive differences in the opportunities afforded to students with disabilities versus the rest of the classroom. We can see the differences in education offered to black students versus their white peers in other parts of the state or other part of the district. This helps us to better understand the problem that families have known about for generations, but now they have the data to support to be able to go to their lawmakers and policymakers and say that we need to make a real change for these kids because look at these test scores. If we recognize, which we should, the test scores flow downstream from the opportunities provided to children. The last argument I'll make for standardized tests and standardization is one that progressives have been making for hundreds of years, which is absent some centralizing force for education, there is a lot of space for false and dangerous information to proliferate. So public education has been pushed for generations as this recognition that if communities are left to their own devices, if it's just based on how much a community can afford or how much they want public schools, then we'd have a world where we'd have a lot of kids that are working instead of going to school. If it's just up to the community to decide, we would have communities teaching incorrect and dangerous views. Centralization says that we can have a little bit more authority on things about the way that we teach, for instance, the Civil War. Without standardized tests around the Civil War and United States history, it is not hard to imagine, actually likely, that a lot of schools, at least in my home state of Georgia, would teach things like the lost cause view of the Confederacy, incorrect view of the Confederacy. This is the belief that the Civil War was fought for states' rights and not over the institution of slavery, that the South is somehow justified in their responses to quote-unquote Northern aggression. standardized test allows for the centralization where we can say, like, here are the facts, and people have to teach to those facts. And so it penalizes teachers and schools that might teach these secondary racist views of education. And the same goes for being anti-science or anti-health. That sort of centralization that comes with standardized tests allows for a little bit more control over those dangerous ideologies finding their ways deeper into the school. Now, I say deeper into the school because I am clear-eyed about the fact that standardized tests have a very racist history in the United States. The person who created the IQ test or tried to use the IQ test here in the States and spread its availability did so as a way to try and prove the fact that European Americans were genetically superior to Black Americans. And so don't read this as some sort of support for standardized tests across the board. I'm saying that without these tests, our schools would have a long way to go to ensure a quality education for all kids with protection specifically for newer teachers and newer administrators about how we shape the purpose of education for kids. And I think we can create that world. It'll just take some work.